do today is the canvas, which if you have it, you may want to pull it up because or if you don't have it, then I would recommend doing this. You're going to have to fill it out. We're going to do this as an exercise. So actually, if you don't have it, just take one, and one per team. But if you want more, actually, that's fine. I'll leave it there. And some, if you want sticky notes, I'll leave them there too. So we're going to fill out those sections on what you see the canvas. Now the goal is to really think through your technological innovation that you'll be working on for the first half of the semester, and try to think from the perspective of how to make that a realistic commercialized technology. That's the whole purpose here. And for that, of course, this is the aspect of entrepreneurship, but it takes some time. But I want you to at least get some of the tools that will help you think about it when you go out into the real world. So this class called How to Build a Startup is taught by Steve Blank, who's a relatively well-known guy in Silicon Valley. He lectures at Berkeley and Stanford, and also at NYU and so on. He teaches an entrepreneurship class. So I actually took this class a couple of years ago, and I was quite, it really changed the way I think about things. So hopefully I'm giving you a flavor for the way to think along those lines, and hopefully you'll learn something from it. But because we only have one lecture to go through it, I'm going to highlight a few of the things that he's going to talk about. And more importantly, you're going to think about your own projects and try to fill in those sections. Okay, that's the whole goal today. There are 9 sections in that canvas that we need to go through. So we can't spend more than 6-7 minutes or so per section. So, but anyway, let me just play this video so you get a flavor for what the philosophy is about. This is really short, so.
Entrepreneurship from last class.
Whoa, sorry. unmute myself. Good.
So what we used to believe for strategy is that you start any company with an operating plan and a financial model. What's an operating plan? Well, it's the business plan. And the belief was all I need to do is spend a lot of time writing this plan, and then all I need to do is execute it. And somehow magical thinking said, if I thought hard enough and if I was smart enough to do all the great market research in the library and looking up all the data and then put together a forecast, the magic 5-year plan in the back of the business plan, somehow magically, all I needed to do was hire the people to execute that plan. If that doesn't sound silly to you now, don't worry, because it didn't sound silly for 40 years. But we now know that's kind of ridiculous. What we now know is that no business plan survives first contact with customers. The first year or so in a startup is completely unpredictable. What you think you're doing on Monday turns out to be completely wrong on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, you discover something new. And on Friday, you're almost out of business. But on Monday, next Monday, you get sold for $1 billion. A startup is an incredible roller coaster, unpredictable series of events that there's no way you could put together in a 5-year plan. Yet somehow investors and educators thought that maybe we could just teach you how to put this all together in a nice spreadsheet. No one ever noticed that the only other people to do 5-year plans were these guys, the Soviet Union. And we kind of know how well that turned out as well. Though much like the fallacy about business plans and financial forecasts, that lasted for about 80 years. The good news is that we now know that business plans and financial forecasts first are just as silly as it was in the Soviet Union. So no business plan survives first contact with customers. This doesn't mean we shouldn't have any planning, but it actually means what we need is planning before the plan. And what that really means is you need to figure out how to actually do some planning, and then you get to write the business plan. So let me be clear. I'm not suggesting we never want to do an operating plan, and I'm not suggesting we never want forecasts, but you need some real facts before you could do that. And one of the ways we're going to organize our facts is with Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas. We'll talk about this canvas in some excruciating detail in the following lectures. But you should know we use the canvas for two things. One is initially, we're going to use it to organize our thinking about all the hypotheses about every part of our business. But second is we're going to get out of the building and actually turn those hypotheses into facts, as we'll find out how to do later. And then as we turn those hypotheses into facts, we'll be updating the canvas on a regular basis, and it will become a scorecard, a way to keep score for our progress of how much we've learned. So what this means is instead of writing the operating plan and financial forecast first, we're going to use the business model canvas to actually capture all our hypotheses first. For the search for the business model, we're going to start with the model first, and then after we find the model, we get to write it up.
Okay, so okay, so you get the idea. So we're going to fill out those segments. You're going to interview potential customers. We'll talk about what that means. Then you're going to revise it, validating your hypothesis. So that's the whole exercise. Now, the rest of the class, what we want to think about are two things. I want to talk about what each of those sections mean. And that means we'll go through each of those video lectures. They're really short. And then each of you as a team are going to think about what you're going to put down and then put it down. And we'll discuss internally as well. And I'll walk around. And those of you online do the same thing. And then we'll go to the next section and so on and so forth. And we'll look at another, at the very end, hopefully before the end of the class, we'll look at an example of what actually has been done in the past. Just maybe 1 or 2 examples. Okay, so that's the plan for today. And I'm going to skip. Let me. Next one. Okay. So, this lecture, lesson 3 is what I'm going to focus on. As you can see, there are topics. Each topic on the left talks about each of those sections in the canvas. Okay. I'm going to start with the first one, though, because it gives an idea of what it is that we are actually trying to do. So let me just play that for a second, and then we'll stop.
Let's take a start at business models and customer development. But before we even begin, one of the first questions I tend to ask is, what is a company? What is it that I'm trying to actually start? Just for the sake of this class, I think we ought to use this definition. A company is a business organization which sells a product or service in exchange for revenue and profit. So explicitly, for the purpose of this class, I'm eliminating nonprofits. Let me be clear, you could use the business model canvas and customer development to go through the process for nonprofits, but actually having some goals that are fairly concrete, revenue and profit, allows us to measure whether we're succeeding and failing in very clear ways. And that leads us to the question, what's a startup? You told us what a company is, but how does a startup differ? And for me, you have to know, I spent 20 years doing 8 startups, and I never could have given you a definition off the top of my head what a startup is. I always thought a startup is where we had free food, where there was a great small team, or where you could bring your dog and whatever, but I never quite understood the purpose of a startup. So I'm going to give you Steve's definition of what it is you're actually doing. One is a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Now, let's go back and parse this sentence because this is pretty important. Number one is temporary. The goal of a startup is not to be a startup. A startup actually aims to become a company. Well, that's kind of interesting because if you really think about it, at least if you're a web mobile startup, there's no such thing as a 10-year-old startup. There's a 2-year-old startup attached to an 8-year-old failure. A startup is a temporary organization. And what are you supposed to be doing? Well, while you think it might be building the product, or maybe if you're thinking harder, it might be get customers. Actually, no. A startup is actually designed to search for something. Well, that's kind of interesting. What is it that I'm supposed to be searching for? Let's see. Well, number one, you want to search for something that's repeatable. And repeatable means the same thing that works on Monday works on Wednesday and works on Friday and works next week and works the next month. That is, I want to find sales and marketing and engineering processes that are repeatable. And I also want to find them scalable. What scalable means, I put $1 in, I get $2 out. Or I put $1 in, maybe I get $10 out. But I better not be losing money on a continual basis, or I'm called a out of business startup. Okay, I know I'm searching now for something repeatable and scalable, but what is it that I'm searching for? And what you're searching for is the business model. And that business model search is the basis of the rest of the class. So let's take a look and see how we become a company.
Okay, so that gives a pretty good introduction to what we are trying to do.
So one of the interesting things about
now he's going to go over the business model overview, and then we'll dive into each of those sections. I'm going to play this one also.
Thinking about a startup is, how is your company going to be organized? And what we now know is the most efficient way to think about all the pieces, just all the parts, is by a business model. And so the next question is, okay, Steve, you just told me to think about a business model, but what is a business model? What are all the pieces? Well, let's take a look. And a business model is how a company creates value for itself while delivering products or services for its customers. Now, if you think about it, in the old days, we think about how to organize a company around functional organizations. We think, no, a company is about its sales department or its engineering department, and you would draw an org chart. But now we're going to draw a very different diagram. We're going to draw a diagram how to think about all the pieces of a business. And so let's take a look at these 9 boxes. 9 boxes to describe any company from the world's largest to a 2-person startup starting in your parents' garage.
Okay, so
Let's take.
So we're going to start in the order, in a sense. It's not arbitrary. What I would consider the order of importance when we fill this in, okay? And the more time we want to spend on the earlier ones. So that's the reason I'm going to go this way as well. And the first one is value proposition. So before I play this, a key thing to think about is really try to think about your particular project, what you're developing. Try to identify as specifically as possible what is the value proposition of your particular idea. Okay, I mean you can make very general statements, hypotheses as well, which is fine, but try to dig in a little bit deeper. Okay, so I'm going to play the video, but think about what you're doing in your own projects as we think about the value
The
proposition.
first piece called the value proposition. The value proposition answers the question, what are you building and for who? The value proposition says, hey, it's not about your idea or product. It's about solving a problem or a need for a customer. That is, what pain are you solving? What gain are you creating? And more importantly, who are your customers? Now, value proposition is a fancy word for what product or service are you building. This is where you normally would list all your features and here's all the speeds and feeds and benefits and whatever. But we're really going to be asking a different question than might have been used to. It's not all about your technology. Your technology is just part of the value proposition. Customers really don't care about your technology. The customers are trying to solve a problem or fulfill a need. By the way, we'll be talking about this through multiple lectures. The difference between a problem and a need is a problem is I have an accounting problem or I want to use a word processor. And those types of products solve problems. But there are other things that human beings do, like I want to be entertained or I want to have a date. Those are some basic hardwired social needs. Or I want to communicate with my friends like Facebook or Twitter. Those are needs. Needs are different than problems. And by the way, if you could find products that solve needs, your total available market, as you'll see later, is huge compared to I solve specific problems.
Okay, so we're going to stop here and you're going to discuss and fill in on your sticky note, what are the value propositions of your particular project? Okay, we're going to maybe take a couple of minutes and those of you online, please do it. You discuss internally and maybe one of you can fill it out on one of the PDF forms. Now, the key thing to keep in mind as engineers, we are of course focused on the technology, but really think a little bit broadly than that. Okay? I'll let you think about it for a minute and then we can discuss. And those of you online, you can let me know if you want to discuss, but I recommend you first discuss among yourselves before you tell me. Great. I can create breakout rooms if you need. So as a first iteration, you can say everything. Fine, that's what I thought. But I think and at the end of this class, I'd like you to take a picture of the canvas. That will be a first iteration. So the key question to ask is what problem I just solved. That would be the easiest way to kind of estimate that. It looks like yeah, you have to be more specific. So what is the specific problem? Is it that they don't have access to fresh water, structure, cost, power? So you may want to kind of think it a little bit more specific. We'll see some examples, but I will probably think about it.
Well, he's walked in the building right now. The other one's on a car accident on his way. Yeah, he's in there. Right. Was online, but he got online while it was.
Okay. Other question? No, okay. We should keep going, I think. Is there a message? That was real thing. Okay. Okay. I think we should keep going to the next section. Otherwise, we won't finish this. So, I assume you guys are okay online, so you're able to fill in the PDF. So the next section they're going to talk about is customer segments, which is on the right. So let's play that video.
So the next thing is, who are my customers? Who
This is,
are
of
they
course, very
and
important
why would they
because it will
buy?
affect your technology,
And
of
as you'll
course.
hear a number of times, your customers do not exist to buy, you exist for them. And what you're going to do by getting out of the building is figuring out all their geographic, social characteristics, demographics, such that you actually could draw and put up a picture of on your wall of who the archetype is or who the persona is of your customer. And it turns out that in most startups, you might have more than one or two or three types of customer archetypes and personas, but you need to understand them in detail. And there is no possible way you could have anything but a hypothesis on day one of who they are.
Okay, so this is, by the way, one of the reasons why you are expected to do an interview after this, so you can actually hear from actual people. So I've been involved in 4 or 5 startups so far, and I can guarantee you that your guesses on the day one, we had lots of guesses, right? They're completely wrong. Almost, I would say 100% wrong. So it's very common. It's very unlikely it's ever right. So definitely talking to the customer is very important. But okay, go ahead and try to fill it up. So think about that. Typical customer.
Basically, it was the customers don't.
So my suggestion is who have you got positions of all three. Write them down. They're very good. So let's do this exercise first. Now, the choice of customer segments is important because it will affect the technology, like how big is your solution, like how much water are you going to make, if it's going to be to a house, a person who's hiking, or the Red Cross, or whatever, right? So that is important. But it doesn't mean you can't do all of them. You can put them all down, and then you can narrow it down later. But again, as he pointed out in the lecture, try to be as specific as possible. So I'm gonna ask for, let's see, how are you guys doing online? Is everyone okay? Let's see. If you want to, do you have any input on the customer segments, one of the teams? If you can talk, I don't think I can hear you. No one? Okay. Okay, let me ask you guys, what are your customer segments?
We're kind of going for the governments of developing countries, disaster organizations, retail, if people find it interesting, we could be willing to sell it to the consumer.
Okay. So your product is a solar cooker.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the first segment is governments of developing countries.
Yeah.
Now, that's a good start. But you need to dig in a little bit deeper. Like literally, who would you be selling to? We need to understand, like, would it be, what department, what ministry, what part of the government, how it's, because that will inform what you're going to fill in later on.
Okay. Yeah, it was just kind of like a broad.
Yeah, sure. You should dig in a little bit deeper than that, I would say. The same, I would say, similar to you, for instance, it would be, so they're considering water for disaster relief. It would be the FEMA, for instance. But again, FEMA is a huge organization. You have to kind of figure out, dig in deeper, what the mission of the FEMA and things like that. Right? And where would it be applicable? Is it after hurricane? Is it after earthquake? I don't know. So you have to kind of also make it a little more specific, because those will really help you understand what kind of technological resources you have to invest into your innovation. So don't just leave it at the high level. That's what I'm saying. I'm expecting a little more detail. Let's see. Is there anything? Yeah. What about you guys? You're doing hydrogen generation. What are the customer segments that you pick?
We picked utility companies, hydrogen, energy-based transportation, like formal, possibly, personal self-sufficiency.
There are gas stations that have hydrogen.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be obvious. We can consider as well.
And then personal self-sufficiency, so like preppers or like radio machines.
Yeah.
And like off-grid industrial applications, so we're building a dam or logging or something.
Yeah. By the way, just what about sailing, the boating community? The same kind of things where you were stuck in water.
Yeah.
Very important consideration. And of course, you need to dig in a little bit deeper because it depends, right? The size and so on. And of course, who can afford to pay also, that's an important consideration. And that will determine your price point and how complicated you want to make your technology as well. So all of these are kind of interrelated, obviously. So that's another important reason to go through this exercise. Okay, so let's go on to the next segment, which is the channels. Now, channels is basically, as you will see, is the reason I'm emphasizing that you understand what the customer segment is, because the channels will depend upon what those customer segments are. So in your case, if you have multiple customer segments, you might have multiple channels. So let's take a quick look at what that means first and fill that up.
The next is channels. How does your product over here get to your customers over here? And we use distribution channels to do that. Now, what's really interesting is pre-1990s, the only channels to get to a customer was a physical channel. That is, you went to a store, you had salespeople, there was physical distribution. But since the mid-1990s, in the last couple of decades, we now have virtual channels, the web, mobile, cloud. And so distribution channels, the first question you want to ask is, how will I be selling and how will I be distributing my products? Are they through physical channels or are they web mobile? Or given today, almost every physical channel also has a web presence. What is the relationship of how your product gets from your company to the customers?